Chapter 11. Iqbal came back the next day, and he wasn't alone. We recognized the man with the clean white shirt as the man Iqbal had seen giving a speech at the market for the Bonded Labor Liberation Front. His name was Ishan Khan. He was a tall, thin man who gave the impression of force and determination. His beard and mustache were well-groomed, and he was again wearing those immaculate white clothes. He had dedicated his life to the liberation of the child slaves. He had been threatened, beaten, imprisoned, yet after each time, he had started afresh, driven by enthusiasm and perseverance. He was stubborn, that's for sure, but above all, his faith in his ideas and his mission were unshakable. We had never met an adult like him. Our parents were tired and unresisting. They lived the same way their parents and grandparents had lived. They thought things would never change and that there was nothing to do to make them change. Their masters took part of the harvest, the buffalo got sick, and the money lenders took their lives and the lives of their children. This is the way it's always been, they said. Before meeting Iqbal, I thought that it was true, that being chained to a loom was a part of the natural order. Ishan Khan opened my eyes even farther. It didn't matter that I didn't really understand everything he said. Ishan Khan became a second father for many of us, while never trying to take the place of our natural families. He was especially a father for Iqbal. It was inevitable. They were both reckless, determined, and convinced that the world needed changing. When Ishan Khan and the two men from the Bonded Labor Liberation Front of Pakistan arrived at Hussein Khan's house, we realized that nothing could stop them. There was a policeman with them, too, but this one had a neat uniform and all kinds of things on his sleeves. "He's an officer," somebody said. There was also a tall, thin man who looked grim and severe. He said he was a magistrate. And then there was Iqbal, with bright, gleaming eyes, jumping and making great signs with his arms. "He did it!" we shouted. "This time he really did it!" Hussein threatened, argued, and begged. He twisted his hands and attempted to show the roll of banknotes he kept hidden in his sash. No one paid attention. Iqbal took them into the workshop. "Look at these children," Ishan Khan said to the magistrate. "Look how thin they are. Look at their hands. Look at all those cuts and blisters, and the chains." Then they crossed the courtyard and went down to the tomb. Re-emerging was Salman and Mohammed, who squinted their eyes against the light, but who still managed to clown around and shout for victory. The policeman took Hussein Khan away, and the mistress shut herself up in the house sobbing. They unlocked the chains, threw open the big front door of the factory, and said, "Children, you're free. You can go now." Shyly, we all approached the door and looked up and down the street. A small, curious crowd had gathered. Some people shouted. We went back in, bewildered. "We don't know where to go," someone said at last. I felt lost and so frightened. "Let's take them to headquarters," Iqbal said to Ishan Khan. They shuffled us into 3 big cars. As we drove away, I managed to peek through the rear window. I saw Hussein's house, the workshop, the courtyard with the well, all becoming smaller and smaller in the faraway dust of the street. I had spent several years of my life there. Had I ever known another home? Iqbal was crowded in next to me. "Do you think we'll ever see it again?" I asked. "No, never," he answered. After a bend in the road, the workshop disappeared, but that little bathroom window of almonds, open sky, and hope would stay with me forever. The headquarters of the Bonded Labor Liberation Front of Pakistan were in a big, old 2-story colonial house with lovely pink paint peeling off its walls. There was a tall fence enclosing a small garden. The house looked onto a busy, narrow street just behind the market. Despite its age and untidiness, it seemed beautiful and comfortable from the first moment. It felt like a true home, warm, free, and protective. We entered a big room on the first floor, full of tables, wobbly chairs, and stacks of newspapers. We could see the books and handouts piled here and there, plus signs and banners, and 3 stray dogs wandering in and out. 2 ceiling fans did their ineffective best to cool the air, while telephones rang incessantly, and men and women spoke loudly, waving their arms to emphasize what they said. When we passed through in single file, silence fell, and they all applauded. We were so embarrassed that we could have sunk through the floor. "This is the home of the Liberation Front," Iqbal explained, "and they're all volunteers. They're our friends. You mustn't be afraid." "Why are they clapping?" "They're applauding us." "Us?" On the second floor, there were lots of rooms. We could see some women working in an enormous kitchen that smelled irresistible. The little place for our needs was bigger than a town square, so clean, and with a mysterious gigantic tub. 3 women ran to embrace us and touch us, chattering among themselves. "Just look at these poor creatures. How thin they are. And their hands. Take a look at their hands. What about their feet? Look at their ankles. Such wounds. And they're covered with lice." Before we could catch our breath, we learned what the big tub was for. It was filled with boiling hot water, and despite our lively protests, one at a time we were caught, immersed, washed, scoured, scrubbed, brushed, and deloused. The women gave us clean clothes. Then they filled us with food and prepared beds in nearby rooms. That evening at sunset, for the first time in my life, I enjoyed the feeling of a full stomach, a clean scent, and fresh bedding. The sounds from the street were closer than ever before. Motors roaring, cars hooting, donkeys braying, voices exclaiming and laughing, a siren wailing, and from far away, a muezzin. I'll never be able to get any rest, I thought, but then promptly fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up at sunrise, as usual, and looked around without realizing where I was. My first thought was, I'd better get to the loom. It's late and the master will punish me. I got up and dressed as fast as I could, then went out on the empty landing of the silent house and peeked down the stairs. No looms, no master, no work. I sat down on the top stair and burst into tears. I hadn't cried in so long. I hadn't cried when I felt lonely and lost, a prisoner in Hussein's workshop. I hadn't cried when my hands bled after a long day's work. But now I couldn't stop sobbing. One of the women we had met the night before left her cooking and took me in her arms. "Don't be frightened, little one," she said. "It's all over." But I wasn't crying from fear. It was something else. Gradually, everyone else woke up, feeling as dazed as me, judging from their expressions. We had breakfast and then scattered around the big room downstairs and the garden. We didn't know what to do. The woman who had comforted me said, "Children, play! The morning is yours." We broke up into small groups, feeling awkward. We hadn't played any games for years. Shan Khan came up to us in his white clothes, smiling. He gathered us around him and asked the names of our villages, so the front could trace our families. "You'll be able to see your parents again," he said. Most of the children cheered for joy and crowded up to him, shouting names of strange, unknown places, but some stayed on the sidelines. Like Kareem, who muttered, "I don't have a family anymore. Where will I go?" Little Maria sidled up close to me and whispered in my ear, "I'm afraid they'll discover that my father's dead. I have only you. Where will you go, Fatima?" "Yes, where would I go?" I wasn't so sure I could remember the name of my tiny village, and I had only the faintest memory of my mother and some faded impressions of brothers and sisters. I couldn't even remember their names. Sometimes I felt I had only imagined them, that they had never really existed. Iqbal approached me. "You'll be going away, won't you?" I asked, remembering his determination to keep his memories, all the small details of his family life. He turned his face away, as if he didn't want to look me in the eye. "Yes," he muttered, "I guess so." "You'll want to see your parents." "Yes," he muttered again. "And aren't you happy?" He paused. "I don't know," he answered at last. That was something I couldn't understand. "You see," he explained slowly, "I really want to see my family after all this time. I want to see my mother and my father, but I don't want to live their life." "Do you think they might sell you again?" "That's not the reason," he said. "My parents, like yours, didn't sell me because they're bad. They had no choice. It was a terrible decision for them. No, it's not that. It's that I want to do something different." "What?" His eyes fell on Ashan Khan. "I don't know," he murmured. We stood there in silence, discouraged. Then Iqbal held out his hands to me and Maria. "Let's go!" he cried. "Where?" "Let's go out. We mustn't be sad." "Go out? Can we?" "Of course we can. We're free." "What'll we do?" we asked together. He smiled mysteriously. "Ishan Khan has given me a present, and I have a promise to keep with you." The city outside was new to us, strange and noisy. We couldn't stop staring. We climbed up the hill that dominates the city until we reached a spot where there was only grass and stones and the midday sun. A kind of mist covered the city below us, but the spring air where we were was clear and clean and transparent. "Don't look," ordered Iqbal. We covered our eyes, but as soon as I realized that Maria was peeking, I did too. I saw Iqbal take a package from under his shirt. He unrolled something white and colored in the grass. Then he began to run, yelling, "Now you can look!" The kite was already high in the sky, dancing with the wind. It flew higher and higher. For hours we passed it from hand to hand until a side swipe of the wind broke the string, and we saw it disappear as it aimed toward the sun. We were sweating and breathless. "We'll make another one," we vowed. In the late afternoon, as we returned down the hill, Iqbal said, "I've decided. I'm going to stay with the Shan Khan, and both of you will, too."